Please welcome to the TEDxSF stage, Aza Raskin.
So I'd like to tell a story about my father. Each one of us that sets out to change ourselves, or to change our community, or to change the world, has a passion story. And this one is mine. In particular, I want to tell you about my father's final gift to me. My father and I actually had a very close, great relationship. Most kids grow up and they call their father, say, father. I called him Jeff. It was always Jeff and Mom, which created all sorts of problems when people thought that they were divorced, but they weren't. It was awesome. And he did this because he wanted to have an equal relationship. He didn't want a power dynamic with us. And it worked. We were best friends. And he taught me my lifelong love of music, curiosity, of physics. He was also the guy that invented the Macintosh at Apple, so he taught me from a very early stage that it's never the user's fault. But this is not the story I want to tell. The story I want to tell is of his final gift. And we have a strange thing we do in my family. It's a strange custom. When we give gifts, it's much more about the giving than the getting. And so when you get a present, you first have to play a game. You have to guess what it is using 20 questions, or what we call plenty questions, before you get it. And I had got the call that my father was sick my senior year of college. I was 21. Oh, thank you. This is my father, by the way, in the 1985 PC World Forum, and that's me. Esther Dyson sent me this photo this year. This is awesome to get. I got the call when I was 21, my senior year of college, and he was supposed to have gone in for gallstones, but it wasn't gallstones. It was pancreatic cancer, late-stage pancreatic cancer. And the prognosis was that he had 3 months to live. And it turned out to be accurate almost to the day. And so I was here staring at this package, this gift that he'd given me, and this gift was in a brown paper wrapping with twine, sort of rectangular, this big. And knowing that he had so little time left, I still had to guess. And we always guess sort of silly things, like we'll say, is it an ostrich egg or a refrigerator? And it's clearly not. It's like clearly a book. But I guess when you're faced with something like this, you follow the rituals, because rituals persist when the person that you made them with doesn't. And so looking at this, I asked, is it bigger than a bread box? And he looked at me and said, no, smaller and much sharper, pushing the game along. And after a little bit of back and forth, I asked, is it a razor? And he said, yes. So I opened it up. After I opened up the outer wrapping, there was the inner wrapping, and it said, for pugnogamy, which means beard shaving. Of course, there's a word for it, and of course my father used it. And it turned out that it was a vintage razor blade, vintage safety razor blade. I don't know if you guys have ever seen one, but it's genius in its simplicity. There's a flat razor, which gets arched underneath a metal shield. Presses down, it makes the razor incredibly strong with that arch. At the same time, the same shield shields your face from getting cut. In it is the simplicity and elegance that all inventors and all designers strive for. And in it was also my father's final gift to me. It was that design is the beauty of using constraints as advantages. And it was there, rendered in steel and wood, and 25 days later, the razor was still there, but my father wasn't. And something that sits in your head is the question, in fact, anyone who's ever gone through something like this question sits in your head, if only we had known. It's one of the most haunting phrases in all of the human condition. If only we had known, then maybe we could have done something about it. But of course, we couldn't have known. Health happens in between doctor visits, and a doctor isn't there to get all of this technology, or all of this data. But for the first time in history, we have these things that sit in our pockets. They're supercomputers. Moore's law is working for the price of sensors. We can know our heart rates. We can know our blood glucose levels. We can know our blood pressure. And we can integrate them. And we can start to tackle the problem of if only we had known. But it's not really a technology problem. It's really a design problem. Let me give an example. 22% of Americans never finish their antibiotics course. That's despite knowing the hundreds of millions of dollars that the US has spent convincing people that they're creating superbugs, that they're not getting better, and yet still, 1 out of 5 Americans never finishes their antibiotics course. Okay, pause. Anyone here remember what a VCR is? Yeah, still is probably the last time I get to use this analogy. If you can't program a VCR, whose fault is it? Is it your fault or the guy or girl who designed its fault? My dad would always say, it's not your fault. It's the guy that designed its fault. They have to make it easier. Antibiotics, 1 out of 5 Americans doesn't finish it. So here's the question. Is it people's fault or is it the fault of the design of our intervention? I think it's obvious. It's the fault of the design of our intervention. If it was a patch you put on yourself and it fell off after the right amount of time, forgetting wouldn't even be a thing. We have to be designing our interventions to work the way people do. And people are highly constrained. Now, it's obvious what our constraints are when it's physical. You can't press 2 buttons that are 10 feet apart. But when it comes to your mental, it's less obvious. But it turns out it's well studied. You can't multitask. You can only remember 7 plus or minus 2 things. We fall to confirmation bias and to gambler's fallacy. Can't even remember what we ate 3 days ago. If we want medicine to succeed at tackling the deepest troubles that our nation is facing, they have to use our human constraints as advantages. We have to bring design into healthcare and have a design renaissance. There's an analogy here. This is the Homebrew Computer Club. Started, of course, in our backyard here. And the people there, Doug Engelbart, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, my father, had this audacious idea that you could take these huge mainframes, make them small enough to fit in people's desks, and even stranger, that people would want this. Right? They knew that if they could just make this thing consumerized, then it would change the world. People would use them to communicate, to shop. And this one is sort of mind-boggling if you try to imagine it, especially if you imagine walking into a giant mainframe computer room to do this, to do such human things as watch porn. And now we fast forward, and what do we have? We have kids who, at 2 or 3, can open up an iPad or an Android device, well, maybe not that one, an iPad, and use it, find the thing that they want. In fact, I saw recently a kid run up to a television screen and try to scroll the credits off the top, because that's what they grew up with. And even funnier, he then later was looking at a magazine and then tried to swipe the page over, because apparently this is now too hard. So we went from mainframes to little kids who think that physical objects work the way our technology does. Imagine what happens when the Homebrew Health Club, the startups, the quantified self movement, gets to be the same thing. This is how the future of health proceeds. Because we do need more data. People are very complex. Peter Norvig, the guy that runs research for Google, is fond of saying that data is 10 times smarter than algorithms. And indeed, in his paper, The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Data, you can see that for every order of increase in magnitude of data set, it doesn't make sense. It obliterates any change in your algorithms. The thing is, with health studies right now, they're often done with 10 people or 100 people, 1,000 people, rarely 10,000. Once in a generation, you get 100,000. And in computer science, we start at 1 million and go up to 1 billion. And for something as complex as our body, we need that. And the only way we get there is with design. The only way we get there is with consumerization of technology. So, the revolution is happening. It's actually already happened, and it starts with a very, very simple gesture, not the one you're thinking of. It starts with a gesture where you take out your phone, and it's an act of defiance to take your phone when you go to the doctor and to slide it across the table. And the doctor picks it up and looks at your eating patterns, looks at your glucose levels, looks at your data, data that you own, that you are giving. That's where the revolution starts, and when you start, you can't go back. So I think my father's final gift to me is also the path forward in making 7 billion people well. That design is the beauty of using constraints as advantages. And we must use the constraints of humans as our advantages in health. And if we do, then health can become beautiful and we can get 7 billion well. So thank you.